Dr. Nabila Idris on Bangladesh context. Thank you, Doctor.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me to this event, and thank you to my wonderful panelists. I've talked to each of them, and I find them very fascinating. Once I am done with the speech, I hope I will be able to get 3 key takeaway points across to you. The first is that crimes like torture and enforced disappearance happen because they can happen in the dark, because of invisibility. Second, that by doing what we're doing here and trying to stop these crimes, we are not merely helping victims, we are also helping the security forces, the officers and the soldiers and the guards. And the third, that in Bangladesh, the system is struggling to develop not because of technical reasons, but because of political reasons. So once I'm done, I hope I'll be able to get these 3 points across to you. Amira has done a wonderful job in talking about NPM, so I will not need to go into details about what it is. But my point stands, which is that the reason such crimes happen is because they can happen in the dark, outside a watchdog's eyes, and because of invisibility. There's a cloak of invisibility. And NPM, or National Preventive Mechanism, allows you to visit places of detention unannounced at whatever interval you choose, and they have to let you in. This sort of watchdog effect has impact in how victims and law enforcement function within areas of detention. I can give some examples from my own work. So there is this professor of a university who was picked up by the police, and he was tortured brutally. He was very brutally tortured. I have taken his testimony myself. He would break down every time he described to me what had happened. What is interesting is what happened after the torture. He was kept in a detention cell. I visited that detention cell, and in fact, by an act of coincidence, I actually found the officer already detained there, because after August 2024, he was taken into custody. And he was actually detained in the same detention cell where he'd kept this professor. Now, this professor said to me that on the night after one of these tortures, when all his limbs had stopped moving, and he was kept in that cell, this officer visited him. And the reason he visited him is because he had seen through CCTV, so he'd gotten his eyes on the detention cell, he'd seen that the professor was praying tahajjud, but because he couldn't move any of his limbs, he was praying with just his finger and his eyes, and the officer had seen the repetitive movement of the finger and figured out what this detainee was doing, and so he'd come and talk to him. And what they had talked about was essentially very human. Because he'd been praying tahajjud, the officer started to talk to imagined him to be, and correctly imagined him to be, quite a religious person. And so he shared with him his woes, which was like he was struggling to have children, and so could this person he tortured a few hours ago pray for him? And these are the things this gentleman remembered. He told me afterwards, he said, this is what the officer told me, and these are the things we discussed. What I want you to focus on is the contradiction in what was happening in that cell. What was happening was very human. It was very human. Everybody involved in that scenario was acting very humanly, but they were acting also like monstrous people. And the reason this contradiction exists is because it can happen in the dark. It can happen without anybody's watchful eyes on them. And it is that lack of watchful eyes, it is that presence of invisibility that we need to remove. So I'll give other examples. Imagine, I see Barrister Arman sitting there. So when he was in custody, he was in enforced disappearance for 8 years, right? Now, he was in enforced disappearance not in some underground location which you do not know of, which is extremely well hidden. He was in a location which is right opposite Dhaka Airport. Amira, you have crossed that location. Romana, you have. Anis, you have. All of us, anybody who's ever been to Dhaka Airport, has crossed the location in which this man was kept in solitary confinement for 8 years, where he could hear the sounds of torture inflicted on other individuals. These are not hidden locations. Similarly, Humam Kader, BNP who was kept detained for 7 months in enforced disappearance, he was not in some hidden location. It was, I have mapped the locations myself. It is 2 minutes walk from DGFI headquarters. It shares, the location he was in shares a common wall with the medical center. So everybody who was ill in that location, with their family members who was ill for those 7 months, visited that location, that detention, that wall which is shared by the detention center. These are not unknown locations. The only thing that makes them unknown is their invisibility, in that nobody can go knock on a door and enter. Nobody has that authority. That's the only thing that makes them invisible. They are actually in plain sight. What NPM gives you the power to do is break through that invisibility. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not only going to focus on the victims. We tend to focus on the victims because, well, it makes sense. They are the ones who are tortured. But I don't think it gives you the full picture of what is going on here. We should also focus on the security forces and how an unfair system is forced on them. So imagine who are in the security forces. These are the same people who live in society with us, our brothers and sisters. Nobody who's beginning their training at Sharda or BMA or Naval Academy starts the training thinking, I will get involved in crimes. It doesn't work like that. I don't think it's fair to look at it like that, mostly because it is simply not true. People who are essentially patriotic, who are here to do a job, they go in there and then something happens through the entire period that turns some of them into perpetrators. And it is worth its effort for us as a society to try to understand what system is this that is creating such perpetrators. Because if we cannot break the system, then we cannot solve the problem. And let me spend some time in trying to humanize this issue for you. So this one night, it was 10 at night, and I was watching through CCTV footage of a pickup. So the gentleman had been picked up and then he disappeared. And all I had was the CCTV footage of the moment of pickup, and we weren't sure what was happening there. All I could see was this man getting up and giving salam to another man, and that's it, that's all you could see. And I remember watching that footage over and over again until suddenly I noticed something, which was when we give salam, our hands are at this angle, right? Our elbows are at around 45 degrees to our body. His was not. His was at 90 degrees. And I thought, I don't think that's a salam. I think that's a salute. And if it's a salute, then I need to look at who he is saluting, because if I take a screen grab of that guy and I look around, I might be able to find the senior officer. And we did exactly that. We took a screen grab of that and went around trying to find who that was. And I did find him. And I had a conversation with him where I asked him, explain what happened. And I realized, and I've done a lot of questionings, and so, you develop an instinct where you're able to differentiate between truth and falsehood to an extent. And I realized the man was genuinely shocked. He was genuinely shocked because he hadn't known that the person he'd picked up had disappeared afterwards. He'd picked him up and then handed him over to another officer. He had no idea. And he was genuinely shocked. And we need to remember that we are inserting certain crimes into the system where not everybody is participating very voluntarily and very willingly. And we need to be careful about how we can frame this as good for the whole of society. This isn't a victim versus security force fight. This is good. For us to stop these crimes, it is good for everybody. There's nobody it's not good for. I'll give an example. Another example. This one person we'd identified had been involved in all sorts of torture. And I remember talking to one of his colleagues who'd served with him earlier and saying that this man, was presenting the evidence, and I said, this man was involved in this crime, and he's unrepentant because I've questioned him and he has no repentance whatsoever. And the colleague said to me, but I knew him when he was younger, when he'd just been posted to RAB, and whenever they would give him such orders, he would go beside a field and cry because he didn't want to do this. Again, the point I'm trying to get across is that we shouldn't, as a society, look at this as a fight between two groups of people. It is not. It is a fight between people who want power and then entirely the rest of society. Entirely the rest of society, which is inclusive of the security forces. What you're trying to do here, the sorts of laws we're trying to pass, is good for everybody, including the security forces. I remember talking to an MP once. He's serving in Parliament now. He's a lawyer and a barrister. And he asked me, why do you think officers do this? Why do people get involved in these crimes? And I said, actually, you're thinking of this as if they're not ordinary human beings. And I think this is a wrong way to look at it. And I have data to support it. It's not just from my own work, but if you look at, say, the Stanford Prison Experiment or the Milgram experiment, what do you see? You see that sometimes, in areas where there is unchecked authority, when there is isolation, the absence of accountability, and no predictability in how rules will be imposed, ordinary people commit extraordinary offenses. It's ordinary people. You're trying to look for people who are monsters, who when they go home, you should be able to recognize them. I keep hearing such testimony from people all the time, like, no, that sir, he cannot be responsible. I've served with him. He's just such a nice and pious man. I do not disagree. We never say that, no, he's not. It's not my job to say so. But it is my job to say that if you put anybody any ordinary human being and give him unchecked authority over others in areas where there is no predictable rule, where there are no legal enforcement mechanisms, you will end up with monsters. And that is not unpredictable. That is how it is going to be every time. So the way Bangladesh is approaching this problem right now is to look for bad apples and go like, this is a bad apple, that is a bad apple, he's who we will pursue, this is the person we will prosecute. And it will not solve the crime. The system will keep spitting out bad apples, and you will then have to start questioning the system and ask, why is this system spitting out bad apples? How many bad apples can we possibly get rid of? How much political appetite is there? There isn't, but there must be for systematic change. And we must bring that, otherwise, again, as I said, this is not a fight amongst victims and forces. This is a fight amongst people who want unchecked power and literally the rest of society. Now, what stops us, and I'll get to NHRC at this point, that what stops us from sorting the system? So when I first got the invitation for this talk, we were in one position. In the last 2 weeks, we have moved into another position. And so I have become somewhat redundant. Anis is laughing, but truly I have become somewhat redundant in this conversation. But let me try nevertheless to get it across. NHRC can be controlled, or a national human rights institution can be controlled in two ways. You can control it through enactment, or you can control it via appointment. What does that mean? That means you can control the law and make it spineless, or you can control the appointment, who you appoint to it, who may not have the ability or the courage to stand up to authority. These are the two ways you can control. In Bangladesh, we've been doing both. We've been doing both. And by not allowing the 2025 NHRC ordinance to pass, and by bringing back, reinstating the 2009 law that Awami League had instated, we have returned to that situation where both through enactment and through appointment. The NHRC as it exists now, as in the 2009 law, does not have any room for NPM, does not have any unlimited access to detention facilities, does not meet Paris principles. These are just the way it is. It just is. By law, it is what it is. So what we have done is we've acceded to OPCAT and then disappeared the domestic legal infrastructure that would allow OPCAT to work. That's where we are. We have something on paper and absolutely nothing in practice, and we cannot have it in practice. The reason for the reason for not passing it and repealing has been, there are two sorts of reasons that have been provided, and I will elaborate on this, then I will end. And there's a reason I elaborate on this, because we will need your help to fight this. There are two broad categories of reasons that have been submitted by the government. One is what they're saying verbally, and so you will see a host of reasons being provided every time you ask for it. And then there are the reasons that have been written on paper, also in government document, also published. So these are not hidden, some sort of Panama paper thing. These are published documents, the report of the special committee, the parliamentary special committee. If you compare the two sorts of arguments, you will see they make very different points. And in our open letter, which if you read the open letter that the departing NHRC commissioners released to the public, it debunks the claims that have been made in Parliament in terms of the things that they're saying that the law lacks. We've shown that the ordinance does not in fact lack that. The ordinance has all of the provisions talked about. And if indeed there are some lackings, if indeed it is felt that there are some lackings, they could have been easily amended instead of repealing the ordinance. And the problem with repealing the ordinance is, today is what, the 24th, 25th, right? It has been 2 weeks during which Bangladesh does not have the definition, a legal definition for enforced disappearance. What that means is, and not a legal definition, you also do not have any organization that can independently investigate an enforced disappearance. So what you essentially have is 2 weeks in which, if there is any enforced disappearance that had happened, you have no legal recourse, you have nowhere to go to. And it will continue until this problem is sorted. Now, on paper though, the government has been more, I should say, more transparent and more honest, in which they have said that the actual problems with the laws are not these problems that are being said in public, but the actual problems are with regards to how independent will an NHRC be? Will it be allowed to have a selection committee that can work freely without executive control? Will it be able to investigate the security forces without seeking government permission? Will it constrain the definition of enforced disappearance All of those things, all of the usual things that are genuinely the problems that are in written government documents. Now, when the new law comes, and I think the new law will come, and I give a credit to people, for example, in this room, I know that a young girl went up to the law minister yesterday and actually held him on this, like, tell me what's happening with the law, and the poor man actually had to answer. So we must give credit where it is due. It is because of people like you that I do think there will be a new law. But when there is a new law, that is where you need to come in, because we now have a roadmap ahead of us. We can check the new law against what the written documentation of the government's own committee says are their real problems with the law. We can check these questions and see, well, does the new law have those same problems? Because if it does, then that's a problem. Those laws won't work. You must remember, just passing a law is not enough. The law actually has to be able to work. And this is where you can have an impact. So the barriers to the NHRC functioning and the NPM functioning these are not technical problems in Bangladesh. These are purely political problems that are easily solvable through public pressure. So as I told you, there are 3 things I will get across today. And I hope I've been able to get them across. The number 1, the crimes like torture and enforced disappearance happen because of invisibility. They operate under a cloak of invisibility. Number 2, that when we tackle these crimes, it is not just for the sake of the victims, it is also for the sake of the security forces. It is actually good for everybody. It is a gift to the security forces who will then have predictable rules to follow. There will be no confusion about what is halal and what is haram. And then finally, the problem why these laws are not operating in Bangladesh and they're not operating well is not a technical problem, it is a political issue. But in this, I want to give the benefit of doubt to the government because as pointed out repeatedly yesterday, this is, after all, only a 2-month-old government. And therefore, I do want to give them the benefit of doubt, which is why I do feel there will be a new law. I think there has to be, in fact, at least 2 new laws, right? The NHRC law as well as the enforced disappearance law. And when they do come, this is what I would like all of us to pay attention to when these new laws are tabled. Whether they give full freedom to investigate the security forces. And remember, that's not just for the victims, it's also for their own good. So whether they give full freedom to investigate the security forces, whether the institution will have independence from executive authority. So for example, it won't be under a ministry. The selection committee will not be controlled by political appointees. Third, the definition of enforced disappearance, whether it includes or excludes national security reasons. And fourth, whether it includes command responsibility. These are the things we need to pay attention when the new laws come, as they inevitably will.
You have said that unchecked power is basically the main reason why this kind of crime happened. So during my tenure in the Police Reform Commission, there is a common narrative from the bureaucrats that you are making police the monster again. Because if they are under the supervision of the executive power, they will be checked. But we know very well that that's not true, and we saw that how executive body handle the police. So how do you approach this kind of dilemma? Thank you.
I think somebody said it yesterday, I think Amar Desh's editor Mahmoud Rahman said it yesterday, that there is a misunderstanding in Bangladesh about how power works or how anything works. People think that what we recognize to be institutional checks and balances, they don't understand that at all. It is about concentrating all power in 1 or 2 individuals and then hoping to God that they are good individuals and we get a benevolent leadership. This is an absurd way to look at life, but that is what they do. So it's about convincing politicians that if they don't listen to our demand for checks and balances, it will have impact on the ballot. That's it. Beyond that, I'm not really sure there's anything. It's really about the ballot box and having that conversation at the ballot box.
Thank you, Dr.